One of the biggest names in the entertainment industry has once again stepped down after accusations of and human.
There aren't many people in history of entertainment with a more dramatic and extreme downfall than Vince McMahon. The once star ruled the world of wrestling for nearly 4 decades, but now he finds himself unable to access it entirely. What did McMahon do to shut him out of the wrestling world for good? Let's find out. For generations of wrestling fans, Vince McMahon has been the guy you just can't miss. For over 40 years, he's been the mastermind behind WWE, turning it from a small New York-based wrestling business into an absolute global juggernaut. Seriously, if you know wrestling, you know those 3 letters, WWE, because they've become the go-to shorthand for the entire industry. McMahon didn't just push boundaries, he practically bulldozed them, taking risks no other promoter dared to dream of. Whether it was expanding the business worldwide, creating iconic characters, or making WWE a pop culture powerhouse, Vince always thought bigger. No ring promoter before him came close to his vision, and honestly, they probably couldn't have even imagined it. Love him or hate him, McMahon's influence on wrestling is unmatched, and his larger-than-life personality helped make the WWE what it is today, an unstoppable force in the entertainment world. McMahon's introduction. Vince McMahon didn't exactly have a storybook childhood. His dad took off when he was just a baby, taking Vince's older brother with him and leaving little Vince with his mom, Victoria, and her not-so-great boyfriends. One of them, Leo Lupton, was a total nightmare, so much so that Vince once joked he regretted not getting the chance to settle the score before Lupton passed. When Vince was 12, his dad finally came back into the picture, but things were rocky. So rocky, in fact, that Vince got sent off to military school. Vince talked about his childhood in an interview. "I grew up dirt poor. When you're in that class, a lower economic class, everyone is, quote, above you. And there were a number of individuals who thought they were above me because of their economic situation. It always bugged me that people would think they were better than me." Despite all this, Vince had big dreams of becoming a wrestler. But his dad was like, "Nope, promoters don't wrestle, they stay behind the curtain." But because Vince doesn't exactly play by the rules, he went on to ignore that advice and became one of the most legendary and infamous wrestling personalities ever. I loved it from the day I saw Vince McMahon wrapped up his business degree at East Carolina University in 1968, and by the next year, he was already hitting the wrestling scene as a ring announcer for WWF. His big break came in 1971 when his dad, Vincent J., who wasn't too keen on Vince joining the wrestling biz, sent him to run a main promotion after one of his guys got busted for stealing. Vince was told this was a one-time chance, but he ran with it, diving into promoting and quickly picking up play-by-play commentary, a gig he'd rocked for 25 years, even if he didn't always know the names of the moves. Before all this wrestling drama, Vince married his high school sweetheart, Linda McMahon, in 1966. They kicked off their life together with some serious financial hiccups, filing for bankruptcy in 1976 due to unpaid taxes and a hefty debt from promoting Evel Knievel's Wild Snake River Canyon Jump. Alright, picture this. It's 1979, and Vincent and Linda are like, "Let's start a wrestling empire." So they create Titan Sports. Fast forward 3 years, they buy out Vince's dad's WWF stock because the old man's ready to hit retirement. But here's where it gets juicy. Vincent J., the dad, is not vibing with his son taking over. He's like, "No way are you becoming a wrestler, and don't even think about running this thing." Vince's big expansion ideas shut down instantly because dad didn't want to mess up their NWA friendships. So even as he's bowing out, Vincent J. makes sure Vince doesn't get full control of the company.
He wanted me to have a more secure future. He wanted me to be an accountant or an attorney or something like that, and I really wasn't cut out for any of the above.
To keep things locked down, Papa Vince brings in his buddies, Arnold Scarland, Phil Zacco, and fan fave Gorilla Monsoon, to hold some shares. But Vince Jr., he's not about that shared power life. He whips out his wallet, buys them all out, and boom, he's now the head honcho of WWF. When his dad passed in 1984, despite dear old dad wanting WWF to stay a small northeastern gig, Vince had other plans, big ones. By 1983, he had already yanked WWF out of the NWA and started poaching top talent left and right. Hulk Hogan, Jesse Ventura, Bobby Heenan from AWA, which by the way went under in '91, and Roddy Piper, Greg Valentine, and Ricky Steamboat from Jim Crockett Promotions, which bit the dust by '88. Vince? He knew exactly what he was doing. Vince said in a 1991 interview with Sports Illustrated that he knew exactly what he was doing.
Had my father known what I was going to do, he never would have sold his stock to me. In the old days, there were wrestling fiefdoms all over the country, each with its own little lord in charge. Each little lord respected the rights of his neighbouring little lord. No takeovers or raids were allowed. There were maybe 30 of these tiny kingdoms in the US, and if I hadn't bought out my dad, there would still be 30 of them, fragmented and struggling. I, of course, had no allegiance to those little lords.
Vince had already pulled in some big-name talent and locked down nationwide TV time, but he knew that wasn't enough. If he really wanted to make wrestling a household name, he had to go all in, no holding back. So what does Vince do? He takes a massive gamble, swiping the Super Show concept from NWA's Starrcade, and then cranks it up with some serious celebrity star power. We're talking about icons like Mr. T, Muhammad Ali, and even Liberace. I mean, when you throw that kind of star-studded cast into the mix, you know something epic is about to go down. The result? WrestleMania in 1985. A wrestling event so big, it didn't just break the mold, it completely changed the way wrestling was broadcast. This was the show that put pay-per-view on the map, making it a cornerstone of the wrestling business. Before WrestleMania, things like Starrcade weren't available on TV at home. Nope, no cozy couch viewing. These events were shown on CCTV. Don't worry, it's not what you're thinking. Not a bunch of security cameras watching people wrestle. CCTV, or closed-circuit television, was how people used to tune in for major events. It was the go-to method for big-time boxing matches, like the legendary Rumble in the Jungle or the Thrilla in Manila back in the 60s and 70s. But here's the kicker. You couldn't just flip on your TV and watch it from home. No way. You had to actually buy a ticket, head down to your local theater, and watch the action on the big screen like you were at the movies. WrestleMania changed all that. It took wrestling out of the theaters and brought it straight into fans' living rooms, making history and turning wrestling into a global phenomenon. And the rest, as they say, is history. Here's the fun twist. Despite WrestleMania being available on pay-per-view at home, a jaw-dropping 1 million fans still opted for the classic theater experience. That was a game changer for Vince McMahon, who quickly became the undisputed king of wrestling promoters. With WWF shooting to the top and ruling the wrestling world, there was practically no competition for over a decade. The only real challenger to Vince's wrestling empire? Ironically, it was Vince himself. His drive and ambition were so fierce that sometimes it seemed like he was his own toughest rival. But hey, that's what made him a legend in the wrestling game. The start of Vince's downfall, the steroids trial. In 1991, things took a wild turn for Dr. George Zaharian III, who found himself convicted for illegally peddling anabolic steroids. It was a huge scandal, especially when it came out that, while he was working as a ringside doctor, Zaharian had been supplying steroids to the WWF. And not just to anyone, he'd been delivering them straight to Vince McMahon himself in his swanky office at Titan Towers. Talk about a high-stakes drama. The plot thickened 2 years later when Vince McMahon got tangled up in his own legal mess. He was hit with serious charges, conspiring to distribute steroids, possession of illegal steroids with the intent to distribute, and even embezzlement for allegedly using Titan Sports Inc.'s funds to fuel his steroid habit. The case was dubbed United States versus McMahon. And it wasn't just a little bump in the road, it was a full-blown crisis that could land Vince in prison for up to 8 years. One of the wrestlers at the time, the Warlord, talked about the situation. The best thing I did was just tell the truth. Vince never came to me face-to-face and said, "Terry, if you don't take steroids, you don't have a job," Warlord said. He also claimed the steroid trial was a witch hunt. With the very real threat of jail time looming, Vince had to get his act together and think about who would keep the WWF running smoothly if he was out of the picture. He knew Linda could handle the business side of things, but when it came to the creative magic that made WWF so iconic, he needed someone with serious chops. That's when he remembered a golden piece of advice from his dad. Vincent J. McMahon had once told Vince Jr. that if he ever needed help in the wrestling world, he should reach out to his old pal, Jerry Jarrett. Jerry Jarrett, the father of Jeff Jarrett, was a legend in his own right. He was the brains behind the Memphis-based Continental Wrestling Association and had a track record of making wrestling gold. Initially, Jarrett wasn't interested in jumping into the WWF, but when the chips were down, he agreed to come on board as a consultant. His role was to oversee the creative side of things just in case Vince was found guilty and had to step away. Well, Vince managed to dodge the legal bullet and was cleared of all charges due to insufficient evidence. But Jerry Jarrett, being the stand-up guy he is, immediately asked to be released from his WWF role. Vince not only agreed, but went above and beyond, paying out the entire remainder of Jerry's 3-year contract as a token of appreciation for stepping in during such a rough patch. This whole ordeal was a real eye-opener for Vince. It was the first time he had to seriously think about succession planning and what would happen if he couldn't be the driving force behind the WWF. The close call made him realize the importance of having a solid plan for the future, just in case things went sideways again, and so the world of wrestling saw Vince McMahon navigating through crisis and learning valuable lessons about leadership and legacy. Vince's business succession. Vince had 2 children with Linda, Shane, born in 1970, and Stephanie, who arrived 6 years later in 1976. Unlike his own father, who kept Vince away from the family business, Vince was all about getting his kids involved early. Shane started working at 15, diving into the family biz head first. He was in the warehouse handling merch orders, took on roles as a referee in the ring, and even dabbled as a producer and announcer. By the time he was 27, he was spearheading the launch of WWF's first official website in 1997. Talk about making an entrance. Stephanie, on the other hand, started out as a model for WWF's sales and merch department. She was the face of the company's cool gear and gear, but she didn't stop there. She soon transitioned into an account executive role at WWF's New York offices. Vince wasn't just about letting his kids work behind the scenes, though. He also made sure they were front and center on screen. Throughout the late 90s and beyond, you could see Shane and Stephanie involved in all sorts of storylines, including one hilariously cringe-worthy plotline where there was a bizarre fake storyline suggesting either Vince or Shane might be the kayfabe father of Stephanie's real-life baby. It was a storyline that thankfully got scrapped, but it showed Vince's commitment to mixing business with dramatic flair. Vince was all about integrating Shane and Stephanie into every facet of WWE. He wanted them to be ready to take over the company whenever he decided to retire. But here's the twist. Vince seemed to confuse family succession with a wrestling match. Instead of a smooth handover, it was like he was setting up a showdown where only one of his kids could win the championship belt of WWE leadership. It was all part of Vince's grand plan to make sure the family business stayed in the family, but with all the drama of a wrestling feud. Vince McMahon had a real talent for stirring the pot, constantly setting his employees, wrestlers, and even his own kids against each other, creating a cutthroat corporate jungle. Shane, Vince's ambitious son, dove into the mix with gusto. He was the go-to guy for sealing major TV deals in Mexico and Brazil, and even launched his own fintech company called China Broadband. Shane wasn't just resting on his laurels, though. He had some seriously forward-thinking ideas, like spotting the potential of UFC back in the early 2000s, when it was barely a blip on the sports radar. He tried to convince Vince to scoop up the MMA promotion, but Vince wasn't buying it. Fast forward 2 decades, and guess what? UFC and WWE merged as equals under TKO Group Holdings. Classic missed opportunity. Shane wasn't done shaking things up, though. In 2006, long before WWE Network was a gleam in anyone's eye, and a full year before Netflix even started streaming, Shane had the bright idea to resurrect ECW as an online-only show aimed at the hardcore wrestling fans lurking on the internet. Vince, however, had other plans. He overruled Shane and relaunched ECW on traditional TV as WWE ECW. Spoiler alert, it didn't go so well and was a pretty big flop. While Shane's grandfather had a knack for spotting TV gold and Vince dominated the pay-per-view scene, Shane had the chance to be the third-generation innovator in wrestling distribution. But the stars didn't align for Shane. In a dramatic twist, it was announced that, effective January 1st, 2010, Shane McMahon would be leaving WWE. This surprising move came right after Vince's wife Linda had stepped down as CEO to dive into the world of politics. It was a major shakeup, marking the end of an era and leaving fans wondering what could have been if Shane's innovative ideas had taken flight. Vince and Stephanie McMahon became the ultimate power couple in WWE, dominating the spotlight as the only McMahons left standing in the company. When Shane abruptly exited WWE, it was shrouded in mystery. But in a 2016 chat with Mick Foley, Shane finally spilled the beans. He left because the business had lost its sparkle and his fresh ideas weren't being given the time of day. It felt like he was stuck in a never-ending handicap match against WWE's backstage power duo, his sister Stephanie and her partner in crime, Paul Levesque, aka Triple H. One of WWE's wrestler talked about the McMahon family. There were two sides of the McMahon family. There was the angelic side with Linda and Shane, and then you had the devils with Stephanie and Vince. While Shane was focused on expanding WWE's business footprint, Stephanie was gradually taking over the creative reins. By 2006, she had climbed the ladder to become the senior vice president of creative writing right during Triple H's so-called reign of terror. The couple's on-screen chemistry wasn't just for show. They started dating in 2000, tied the knot in 2003, and became WWE's power couple, both in the ring and behind the scenes. Though Triple H didn't have an official title at first, he was rumored to wield a lot of influence over creative decisions. His role was officially made legit in the very same year Shane made his dramatic exit from WWE. Vince seemed to have clearly chosen his successors, the dynamic duo of Stephanie and Triple H. Vince even gave Triple H his own pet project, NXT, to groom him for future leadership. But there was one formidable opponent in their way. Kevin Dunn, WWE's executive vice president of productions and Vince's right-hand man for 3 decades. Despite the growing power of Stephanie and Triple H, Dunn was still a major player in the backstage game. He was like the ultimate roadblock in their path to dominance. Things took a wild turn in 2012 when WWE's business began to slump. Dunn saw his chance and reportedly set up a clandestine meeting with Vince, businessman and author James Frey, and surprise guest Shane McMahon, who had been out of the picture for 2 years. The buzz was that Dunn pitched a plan for WWE's faltering ratings. Shane would take over all creative duties, including running the writer's room. When Stephanie caught wind of this secret powwow, she reportedly went as pale as a ghost, while Triple H had a full-on meltdown. Talk about family drama. Fast forward to 2016, and Shane made a sensational return to WWE. His comeback was nothing short of epic. He challenged The Undertaker at WrestleMania 32 in a high-stakes match for control of Monday Night Raw. Shane may have lost the match, but in true WWE fashion, he still managed to snag control of Raw anyway. It was a classic WWE plot twist, showing that in the world of wrestling, the drama never truly dies. With Shane back in the mix and the backstage power plays continuing, the McMahon family saga was far from over, keeping fans on the edge of their seats for what would come next in this larger-than-life wrestling drama. Shane McMahon swore his return to WWE was all about letting his kids see him wrestle, not about chasing backstage power. By 2019, he was back in the producer's seat, and by 2022, he'd taken on the task of booking the men's Royal Rumble match. However, that Rumble quickly became infamous for all the wrong reasons. It's widely considered one of the worst Rumbles ever, and here's the lowdown. The match was a chaotic mess, with awkward spots, confusing storylines, and a lack of the usual excitement that fans expect. Instead of a thrilling showcase, it turned into a jumbled spectacle that left fans scratching their heads and wondering what had gone so wrong.
Because Shane created chaos, had everyone in an uproar, pissed off everyone in the Rumble, openly buried other producers, and was changing things that Vince wanted.
Several days later, Vince fired his own son, Shane, from the family business, but that was the least of the problems that the company would face in 2022. The downfall.
Vince McMahon, the infamous founder of World Wrestling Entertainment, has resigned as executive chairman of its parent company. The move came a day after McMahon was accused of assault and sex in the lawsuit.
In June 2022, Vince McMahon, the larger-than-life figure who'd been the face of WWE for over 40 years, stepped down as CEO and chairman amid some seriously intense allegations of sexual misconduct. The Wall Street Journal revealed that Vince was under investigation by WWE's own board for paying hush money, nearly $20 million in total, to several female employees from 2006 to 2022. With all this scandal swirling, Vince resigned the next month, and for the first time in decades, he was no longer part of the wrestling scene. With Vince's departure, a huge void was left in the wrestling world. It was like a giant piece of the puzzle had been taken out, and someone needed to step in to fill those massive shoes. Enter McMahon Welmsley and Nick KH Power Trio. Stephanie McMahon and KH took on the roles of co-CEOs, while Triple H, or as you might know him, Hunter, was named Chief Content Officer. Essentially, Triple H became the head booker, the guy responsible for crafting the WWE storylines and matches. Even though Vince was out of the picture, Stephanie wasn't about to let the WWE empire crumble. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, ensuring that her dad's legacy didn't fade away. The transition wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Think of it like trying to drive a sports car on a bumpy road, but Stephanie managed to steer WWE back on course. Under her leadership, the creative side of WWE got a serious boost, bringing fresh and exciting content to fans. So, even though Vince McMahon might have exited stage left, WWE was in good hands. With Stephanie, Triple H, and KH at the helm, the show went on, and the wrestling world was treated to a new chapter full of drama, excitement, and unforgettable moments. Just when the dust seemed to have settled and WWE looked like it was getting back to business as usual, Vince McMahon couldn't resist making a dramatic return. The man who had once ruled the wrestling world with an iron fist decided that the spotlight and power were too tempting to stay away from, even if it meant overshadowing his own daughter. Despite stepping down and passing the CEO torch to Stephanie, Vince still held the reins as the majority owner of WWE. This meant that no one could really stop him from making a comeback. Many people thought he was just bored or nursing his bruised ego, dismissing his dramatic threats to re-enter the scene as nothing more than a show. But lo and behold, just 6 months after his resignation, Vince pulled off a jaw-dropping coup, reclaiming his throne as chairman of WWE. If you thought Vince McMahon's return to the throne didn't come with some messy family drama, think again. As soon as he reclaimed his spot as chairman, his daughter Stephanie found herself on the outs. And it wasn't just a boardroom shakeup. Stephanie didn't just resign, she left the entire company behind. Clearly, something seriously ugly must have unfolded between father and daughter for her to walk away from it all. But Vince's victory lap was short-lived. As if the universe was serving him a dose of poetic justice, a former employee stepped forward with allegations of emotional assault against Vince. With the spotlight now turned harshly on him, Vince had no choice but to step down again. This time, though, he wasn't getting any help from Stephanie. She wasn't around to smooth things over or clean up his mess. The drama had reached its peak, and Vince was left facing the fallout of his return all on his own. Former employee Janelle Grant claims she was physically and emotionally abused by Mess. Turns out, Vince burned all his bridges this time and made it impossible for him or his children to get back in the company. You see, just before he was accused of harassing his employee, he had announced a merger between WWE and UFC to form TKO. Vince had naively assumed that he would still remain in charge of WWE even after the merger, but that turned out to be a false belief. After he had to resign the second, the merger also proved to be the final nail in the coffin that shut him out of the wrestling world for good. Just like that, one of the biggest heroes of the wrestling world had his tragic downfall, and he not only took himself down, but also ruined his legacy in the process. That's it from our side for today. If you liked the video, click on the links on your screen to watch similar ones.